Hi guys, as promised, I'm back with part 2 of my video relating to the Yannick Sinner drug case that has gripped a lot of tennis in the last few weeks, and I'm certainly someone that's been paying a lot of close attention to it to try and find out what really happened and whether the explanations that we were given were plausible. So for those who haven't seen part 1, my first video done earlier today was basically just setting the background in terms of Yannick Sinner, in terms of his career, in terms of the changes that he made with his coaching team in the last couple of years, the fact that his fitness trainer, who was an experienced pharmacist, and his physio, who was an experienced and talented physio, made what I thought was some really, really bad mistakes in the healthcare professional world, ignoring multiple warnings regarding a banned product and then not applying relevant hygiene and healthcare in applying massages and treatment to Yannick Sinner when Naldi, who was a physio, knew that he was undertaking some treatment himself which involved a banned substance. So I've basically put it out there. As I said, it's up to people to decide what they think, but I think there was a number of areas that either were extremely negligent or didn't seem to be plausible in view of their experience as healthcare professionals. So we're now moving on into the kind of investigation, and a lot of my information is derived from the report that the ITIA was presented to via the tribunal, a 33-page report, which ultimately is what the tribunal decided on whether Sinner would be found with fault or whether he would remain guilty. Obviously, he was guilty because he failed 2 drug tests and as a result lost his prize money at Indian Wells and also ranking points. So for those people saying that, oh no, he's innocent, he wasn't innocent. He failed 2 drug tests, and as a result, he was punished. The point really of my investigation is why he wasn't punished longer and more kind of mandatory suspension, as we have seen a lot of lower ranked players and other players across the world who have suffered similar failures of drug tests that they've had to then complete a lengthy suspension. Now, we need to talk about the ITIA. So the ITIA is a new body that was built in tennis to look after anti-corruption, anti-doping. It was set up in 2021, and the CEO is a lady called Karen Moorfield, whose experience has been actually in rugby union, so not in tennis, but was given the job in 2021. Now, previously, drug testing in tennis was undertaken by WADA, which are the biggest, probably the most reputable drug agency that is out there, and they're known for their rigorous checks and their kind of no-nonsense approach to anyone that fails drugs tests, and are kind of seen to be the kind of flagship of these sorts of industries. Now, they can't look after every sport. It just takes too much manpower and labor, and so they outsourced some of their jobs in certain sports, and tennis was one of them. So they outsourced the responsibility of anti-doping procedures to the ITIA. So when people say, why haven't WADA got involved, they have then signed a contract with tennis to say, we give you permission that you've got an agency renamed the ITIA that is going to look after that, and we wouldn't get involved in any cases, which is one of the reasons why they've not really got involved in this case. Now, a couple of things here. First of all, the ITIA is funded by the ATP, by the WTA, and by the Grand Slams and ITF. So it is funded by tennis. Now, the important thing here is that a lot of, if we look into Yannick Sinner's primary sponsors. He's got multiple sponsors. I think he's got over 12, 13, 14. I don't know how many sponsors he's got, but some of his big ones are Nike, Prada, Gucci, Rolex. Now, some of these sponsors are now sponsoring big tennis events. So, we know the Rolex sponsor a number of tennis events, and we know that Nike are heavily involved in a lot of tennis as well. So for me, there's a conflict of interest there, because you're setting up an ITIA, a tennis agency, a multi-million pound non-for-profit organisation, but its funding is coming from tennis. Now, if we go back to the stage where Yannick Sinner was allegedly told that he failed the drug test. Now, the drug tests were taken in March the 10th and March the 18th. Apparently, his results didn't come until the 2nd of April. Now, I find that slightly strange, in that the due diligence that I've done have kind of advised me that the results for these tests come back within a couple of days. So alarm bells for me, again, need questioning, is why it took so long for Yannick Sinner to be told that he had failed a drug test on March the 10th and was told in the first week of April, almost a month later. Now, during this time, Sinner is continuing to compete, even though he has just failed 2 drug tests, and he goes on and plays Miami. He doesn't just win Miami, he absolutely kind of destroys the field in Miami. So in the semi-final, he beat Daniel Medvedev 6-2, 6-1 in just over an hour. A year before, Medvedev had beaten Sinner in straight sets. So you can see there's been a massive shift of form in 12 months on the same surface in the same event. He then faces Grigor Dimitrov, who was playing the best tennis of his life, and he does the same demolition job to Dimitrov. He beats him 1-3 in 1 hour, just over 1 hour, 10 minutes. And he goes on and lifts the title. Now, he lifts the title on the 31st of March. So he's lifted the title when he has just failed 2 drug tests for having a banned performance-enhancing substance in his system. So my first question mark is, should he have been allowed to have even played Miami? Because someone somewhere would have had those results, that would have known it was Yannick Sinner, and they would have known that he failed his tests. And I don't know the procedure. I'm not going to pretend I know what the procedure is, but I would imagine someone from the ITIA would have known. Now, the problem that the ITIA have got is, now I've talked to you about the background in terms of how they're funded. They're funded by tennis. During this time, Yannick Sinner was closing in on the world number 1. Now, Novak Djokovic at this stage has completed the record of the most weeks as number 1. He is breaking every single record every week, and he's been number 1 for weeks and weeks and weeks. And this is grating on the establishment, because I've already alluded to in part 1 the reasons why they don't particularly like Djokovic. So they had built this huge big fanfare. You're talking of all the big sponsors behind Sinner. He is the role model. He's on every promotion. He's everyone's favourite. The kind Yannick Sinner. He doesn't lose his temper. He's always calm. He's always sweet. He's always plays the tennis in the right way. We've all seen the promotion, non-stop promotion about Yannick Sinner. But he was now closing in on becoming the world number 1. Now, this poses a huge problem for tennis, because at this time, tennis are now going to the likes of Andre Agassi, Gustavo Kuerten, Roger Federer, so many greats in tennis, and are putting together a portfolio about how proud they are that Yannick Sinner has got to number 1, and it's a later video that's released that I shared on X at the time. So they have now just received results that Yannick Sinner, who is just about to become the world number 1, who is now the most sponsored player in the history of, currently in men's tennis, and he has been pushed and promoted from all angles, has just failed 2 drugs tests. Now, can you imagine the embarrassment, really, of the ATP, of ITF, anyone involved in tennis that have been pushing and promoting this player as a role model, will then suddenly break the news to say, actually, he's just failed 2 drug tests. His sponsors would be livid. They've invested a lot of money in this. Tennis would be in a difficult position because a lot of his sponsors also sponsor tennis. This is the new golden boy that is going to drive tennis forward. So they will put into a really, really bad situation here. Now, my point, well, there's a number of points that I'm not very happy about, but there was a book that Andre Agassi released a few years ago, which he basically confirmed that he was banned for taking a banned substance. In his case, it was crystal meth. So it wasn't performance enhancement, it was a recreational drug, but it was still banned. And in that book, he told us that it was a silent ban. So that basically meant that he was not able to play tennis. He was suspended from tennis, but he was able to use an excuse to say either he had an injury or, he had personal issues. He didn't have to tell the world that he had just failed a drugs test, because he was one of the top players in tennis and he brought a lot of money to the sport, a little bit similar to Yannick Sinner. The ITF, who are the governing body of tennis, the International Tennis Federation, a few years ago said that we are no longer going to allow any silent bans. So as soon as someone fails a drugs test, it's going to be made public. That is what they said. And you can check that on their governance. And at the time, there was articles at the time to say there's going to be no more silent bans. So my first question in part 2 is, why was that not adhered to with Yannick Sinner? Now, everyone who is part of Sinner and part of the people that are promoting him and supporting him and he can't do anything wrong are saying, well, he hired good lawyers. He was in a position to hire good lawyers and, they were managed to able to do, go through loopholes and do whatever. But, I don't buy that. Maria Sharapova was banned for over a year. She's one of the most highest earning female tennis players in the world. Simona Halep, a world #1 tennis player, again, is one of the highest earning female tennis players. They both had means to get the best lawyers as well, but it didn't help their case. So why did it help the Sinner case? Now, I'll tell you why. Now, one of the reasons the ITA have said why they listened to Sinner was that Sinner and Darren Cahill were able to identify the source of why they think they were contaminated with a banned substance within 5 minutes. Now, for me, that's alarm bells. So if you're a professional athlete and you've just been told that you have tested positive for a banned substance and you don't know, you haven't got a clue where that comes from, because, we're assuming that you're a clean athlete and this is a complete shock. You could think, where's this come from? Has it come from something that I've eaten? Has someone spiked me? Has someone, there's a whole number of questions. And that's why, the people like Simona Halep and Tara Moore, who have been suspended for months and months, they couldn't identify the initial source straight away. Not many people can. Not many innocent people can, because they don't know where it comes from. Yannick Sinner and Darren Cahill and his team, I said they identified it within 5 minutes. Oh, it must have been from the massage given by Naldi. But at this point, Darren Cahill has already told us that he asked, was Naldi using any substance? And he said no. Sinner was asking. So how do they even know that he was using this spray? And how do they know that this spray had a banned substance in it? So these are the questions that need to be asked by Yannick Sinner. But this is kind of what they've gone with. So the legal team have asked for privacy. So they've basically said that this cannot be made public because we've given you explanations to why this simply cannot be for Yannick Sinner. It takes the ITA just a couple of days to say, okay, that's fine. Now, you've got to remember here, in a lot of other cases, people are innocent until proven guilty. Yannick Sinner has failed 2 drugs tests. He is guilty. It's on him now to prove that that guilty decision is wrong. So what should have happened was that he should have been provisionally suspended when 2 of those drug tests he failed and he tested positive for a banned substance, and he should have been suspended until the outcome of the tribunal was made and he was cleared, which was several months later. That didn't happen. Yannick Sinner was allowed to play. So we've heard now that Yannick Sinner was literally banned for a couple of days. Even though he failed 2 separate drug tests, they decided not to make that public. Not only did they decide not to make it public, they went on and celebrated Yannick Sinner as being the world number 1. So the ATP are now promoting him. He's on new world number 1. Yannick Sinner and his team are seen celebrating. What also surprises me, we're now in June, is that his physio, Giacomo Naldi, is still with the team. So if you know, as someone who hires a member of the team, that they have caused you to fail 2 drug tests, why are they still with you in that team? And people say, oh, you know, they might have been under contract. If someone does something to breach that contract, you can get rid of them straight away. Part of that contract would be saying that you are making sure that you are acting diligently, without negligence. You know, Naldi failed all of those. So Sinner could have sacked him straight away. He should have sacked him straight away. If he doesn't want to sack him, for whatever reason, suspend him. You know, suspend him, because until that decision is made, he's continuing to work with Naldi. He's continuing to play tennis tournaments. He has just failed 2 drug tests for a banned substance that we know statistically in Italy has been used by numerous elite athletes, and they've all been banned for using it. And nearly all of them have given the same excuse, that it was a spray and it was contaminated via a physio applying a massage to them. So this is, for me, it puts tennis in a very, very difficult position. At this point, the ATP are denying all knowledge. This is their official kind of stance, is that, well, we didn't know. So ATP, who fund the ITIA, apparently were not told that Yannick Sinner, the world number 1 tennis player in the world, had failed 2 drug tests, and it was kept in private by the ITIA. The same ITIA that took months and months to listen to Simona Halep in a hearing, because they said the onus is not on them. It takes time to get these things done. So the ITA then get a panel of 3. None of these people that they picked had a background in tennis. So a lot of the people that I've spoken to are actual physios of tennis players. I've spoken to elite tennis players that have told me and messaged me and said, this story just does not hold sway. It doesn't make sense. We are in the tennis industry, and what their team is telling us doesn't make sense. So why is a tribunal believing this particular story? Now, at that time, this is kept under wraps. So if I was innocent and I was playing tennis and I had nothing to be afraid of, I would publicly say, listen, I failed 2 drug tests. This is what I would say publicly. I'll do a press statement, and I will say to them, I'm going to prove to the world that this was of no fault of my own, and I had no idea of what has happened. But I'm being open, I'm being transparent. If I was innocent. Yannick Sinner continued playing tennis tournaments. But all of a sudden, if you look at his interviews and his body language, it looks as though he's got a bit of a weight on his shoulder. It looks, he doesn't seem to have his same kind of mojo, and I think he's worried at this stage whether it gets out in public. He's going to be made to look a fool. You remember, he's backed by big players of the establishment who are relying on him. He's a big money player. There's a lot of money, multi-million pounds here at stake. Now, this is when Sinner then puts out a statement to say that he's got this sort of hip injury. Now, anyone in tennis, any athlete will know that a hip injury can be quite serious. You just have to look at Andy Murray and his hip injury and how long it took for him to get back, and he never really was the same player after his injury with his hip. So, he puts out his comment to say, I'm not really sure what's going to go on. I could be out of the game for a long time. So, this is Sinner within the full knowledge that he's still got to go through this hearing. He's still got to put his case forward, and he can't be sure in terms of which way the hearing goes. No one can at this stage, if you're believing that these hearings are being done legitimately and lawfully. Now, Yannick Sinner and his team decide to hire one of the legal teams that represent the ITIA. So they recruited this lawyer that works for a legal firm in London that worked with the ITIA. Now, Tara Moore, who has been in a similar situation to Yannick Sinner in that she tested positive for a banned substance, but she stated that it was to no fault of her own and was later exonerated because it was proven that it was through some contaminated meat that she had eaten in South America, which has happened to a number of other players, advised that the same solicitor that was fighting against her for the ITIA was now fighting for Yannick Sinner against the ITIA. For me, that's a conflict of interest, because that solicitor will know exactly the rules and procedures that the ITA follow and what can and they can't do and what they can bend and if there's any loopholes. So that is another big red flag for me. Now, the tribunal happens and the results come out on the day that Yannick Sinner wins the Cincinnati title. Now, it's very interesting looking at Yannick Sinner's body language during the post-match interview, because I believe that they had just been told that day that they are going to have to make the findings of this tribunal public. And I believe this was because of a whistleblower, because Darren Cahill kind of alluded it and said, oh, well, it's out it's out in the open now. And then it was almost like kind of they were given some sort of assurances that this was going to remain public. And Yannick Sinner looked quite shocked, and he probably didn't know what he was going to get in terms of the media press and, everything that he's kind of worked for in terms of sponsorships. He's got himself to number one. And he had an interview straight after the match, and Prakash Amritraj's first line was saying, Yannick, you look really serious. You've just won a Masters title. It's a big title. And Sinner could barely muster a smile. And it had all, at that stage, they had been told that day, because we know that they've been told, because Andy Roddick in his podcast had said that he had texted Darren Cahill, who was Yannick Sinner's coach, and they had just found out on that day that he was that it was going to be made public, and apparently he was cleared. So my whole point around this segment of the video is the ITA acting independently? No, because it's funded and there's multi-millions involved here by the ATP, by the WTA, by the ITF, by the Grand Slams. Now, what I find astonishing is that the ATP to this day have not done a press conference explaining exactly what happened, what the procedure was, and why Yannick Sinner was treated differently to all the other players that have failed multiple drug tests. Why was his story believed when a few months before an Italian player called Stefano Battaligno, I have to apologise for my pronunciations, was suspended for 4 years in an almost identical case? So in this case, he also failed 2 drug tests, and there was also a very, very, very small amount of clestable found in the system. Now, this player said it was due to a massage by a physio. The difference here is that Naldi is very, very close with Sinner. You know, you look at their Instagram and they've been hanging out together. They are friends. They're more than just physios. Naldi will be paid very, very highly as a physio to Yannick Sinner, the world #1 player. This lower ranked player doesn't probably even have his own physio. The physio that he said was contaminated one was from the tournament physio. The tournament physio didn't want to testify. So this is why he was banned. But the key point is it was the same products, it was the same banned substance, the same excuse given. So I don't know whether this is, that's a coincidence. What are the odds of that? Is that, the same excuse is given? Is this something that's pre-planned? We don't know. And the only reason that he got suspended was that this physio didn't want to give evidence. And this physio hasn't really got any connections with this lower ranked player. This lower ranked player cannot ask this physio or be any means to say, can you testify? He's got no allegiance to him. So, this is why I was asking that. For me, if I was investigating this properly, I would have asked to have seen Naldi and Ferreira's bank statements to see if there was any large payments coming in. Now, this is just standard. Anything that is as serious as WADA and ITIA say that they take corruption would be a standard process. Now, I know that they can have the means to ask this. I know a lower ranked player and they've asked to take people's phones and they've kept them for 24 hours while they're assessing this. This is part of their due diligence. Now, I do not believe that the bank statements were checked, and I would have felt that that was an important part of the investigation to have a look at that, but it wasn't done. Now, I'm going to bring this back to Novak Djokovic. Novak Djokovic hasn't really got anything to do with this case, by the way, but if this was Novak Djokovic, we saw the media furore, the ATP's statement, everything that happened to Djokovic in Australia 2022 for simply not taking a brand new drug. He was pillared from posts, from media posts, from everyone investigating him, checking Serbian hospitals, checking his COVID test, doing anything and everything to try and incriminate him and investigate what was going on. None of the media have done any of this. So, the first media that we have is the people like Andy Roddick, who's going out and defending Yannick Sinner, not even asking the questions. You've got Rafa Nadal, who, we know is very much part of the establishment, who's probably one of the only few players that have defended him. But on the flip side, you've got so many other players. Carlos Alcaraz is not sure if this story kind of fits. Daniel Medvedev said the same thing. Novak Djokovic is, we're not really sure what's happened here. There's need to be questions. Alcaraz, Medvedev, Djokovic, Grigor Dimitrov, Nick Kyrgios. Obviously, he's been very vocal about this. Denis Shapovalov. A lot of players, Simona Halep, Patrick Mouratoglou, a lot of players are saying, and coaches and prominent people are saying, John McEnroe. Not sure if this is really adding up, and further investigation is needed. No further investigation was done. So the independent, and I'll put that in hyphenated commas because we don't know who these people are, who pays for these people, how are they, how do we know that they're independent? How do we know that they're not linked to Yannick Sinner or one of his sponsors? We don't know that. We have to trust the ITIA. Why has the ATP not done a press conference? Why has Yannick Sinner not done a press conference? It's something that he's a high-profile player. You would have thought he would have done this. If this was Djokovic, it would be on the news 24/7. And the reason it would be on the news is that no one would believe the story. They would say it's complete BS. And they wouldn't be accused of, harassing Djokovic. And we've seen the levels of harassment that Djokovic has had over the years. But now they're protecting Yannick Sinner. So they're targeting people like me who are speaking out because they don't want the truth to be known. They don't want an investigation. If the media did their job and put the pressure on, they know that WADA would then have to, because of public pressure, they would have to investigate this case from scratch. and have to look at everything. And they would bring in industry experts. They would bring in people that work in tennis. They would bring in physios. They would say to them, is the story that is provided plausible in your opinion? They would ask a lot more questions. But WADA are not going to get involved at this stage because they've outsourced their responsibility to the ITIA. So they would only ever really get involved if the public pressure was that much that it demanded a public inquiry, and for WADA to say, actually, we need to step in. And the only way that would happen is if there was mass media investigations, similar to what I'm doing, but the media have got the resources. They can go out and interview people. They can go to wherever. This is their job. They've got money to investigate. People who are employed by journalists have a pool of money that they can go and investigate. They can even do the test themselves. If they wanted to, they can go out and say, actually, here's some cholesterol, do a drugs test. They can actually do exactly what Naudi said and say, actually, yeah, does this tie in with those numbers? None of that has been done. So WADA are not going to get involved because there's no public pressure. None of the media talk about it anymore. It's almost forgotten. So, this is why I'm now getting targeted by the likes of John Wertheim, Bastian, whatever his surname is, Rene Stubbs, because they don't want people investigating this story, because there's holes in this story. There's holes in this story. When you listen and look at the body language of Darren Cahill and Yannick Sinner, there's holes in this story. And again, I will reiterate, I'm not saying that they are cheated, they are drug cheats, but I'm saying that they failed a drugs test, and I am questioning whether this story that they've given is plausible and whether it's true. And for that, it merits further investigation, in my opinion. And it needs another company that is not being funded by the ATP, because there's conflict of interest there. So it has to be looked at by a fresh pair of eyes that are not involved in getting any funding from tennis. Okay, so that is kind of part two of why this is so important to me. And again, I want to reiterate, this is not about Yannick Sinner. Yannick Sinner has used the system, he's used the lawyers, he's used whatever he can to minimize damage to him in terms of reputational damage. He gets to keep all his sponsors. He's won the US Open. He's now on a massive PR campaign, and he's in schools and educations. There's a lot of work to be done. Fair play to him. Fair play to him. I'm doing this for the other players that I know have been mistreated, that I've had to wait months and years. It's unfair. Different rules for different players. And my whole notion of being on Twitter and my platform is to expose what I think there is a huge level of undue influence from the establishment. And I believe that is resulting in corruption in certain things. And, that is kind of where I'm at with this part two. The next part is kind of really going to be talking about the kind of reactions that we've had from players and media, or the lack of any investigation. It's almost like it was no news, and anyone that dares to challenge them, I've had horrific levels of abuse. People saying, oh, sue him, do that. I've had harassment, I've had racism, I've had death threats, I've had the worst possible abuse that you can ever imagine, really. And I'll continue to get that because they do not want me to speak. And all I'm doing is asking the questions that any good journalist should. But we have to ask the question why this isn't happening in this particular circumstance. So I will continue to raise my voice, to speak up. I don't think the media are doing what they are paid to be doing. And as I said, in part one, media is a passion for me. I studied media at college. I was going to go into the field of journalism, but I decided not to in the end. But it's always been my passion, and it's been a passion of me investigating things to try and find out the truth. And I will continue to do that. And I have to thank, a lot of people in the tennis world that are helping me with this, whether it be fans or players or media, because a lot of people want to get to the bottom of this, because there's a lot of holes that still have not been filled and answers that have not been answered. So, we are just here trying to put a different perspective forward. And we're not going to get intimidated by these bots and trolls and people that work for the establishment, because many people like the easy life. If you're getting paid and you're getting job opportunities, why would you want to upset that apple cart? There's only very few people that will go out of their comfort zone to do the right thing, and this is doing the right thing, is questioning it. And had Yannick Sinner been suspended up until the point where the tribunal decided that he bore no fault or negligence, I would have had zero issue, because he would have then been suspended for 3 or 4 months. He wouldn't have got to number one. He would have been punished, but then he would have cleared himself like any other player, and I would have said, fine, I'm absolutely fine with that. My biggest issue here is that he wasn't punished, and I believe the reason that he wasn't punished was because his name was Yannick Sinner, and he was the most, the most invested tennis player at the time. And that's the reason why I think a lot of stuff didn't happen in his case. So there you go. There's 2 videos for me today. I will be back with more. I'm still doing due diligence on this as we speak. I don't think WADA are going to have a look into this any further for the reasons that I've already explained. So it's really going to be up to us. People that want to try and find out the truth are going to keep asking the questions until those questions are answered. Then we will continue. But I'm going to sign off on that note. 36 minutes this time, a little bit less, a little bit more than the other one, but still less than 40 minutes. So take care, good night, God bless wherever you are, and keep asking questions. No one can ever, no one should ever intimidate you. It's our freedom of speech to ask questions, and no one can ever take that right from us in a democracy. This is what I know my grandparents fought for in both worlds, for our democracy and our freedoms. And it's certainly not something that I'm going to be willing to relinquish due to some bully boy tactics to try and silence me. Okay, peace out. Take care. Bye.